Welcome to the Truckers and Nerds podcast, where we connect real-life truckers with freight tech companies to discuss technological innovations in the trucking industry. The Truckers and Nerds podcast is hosted by Tobenna Diobu, CEO and founder of CloudTrucks. This podcast is brought to you by CloudTrucks.
All right, so welcome to a new episode of Truckers and Nerds. This is episode 9. So this is the Truckers and Nerds podcast by CloudTrucks. And today I wanted to have a conversation with Sam Tibbs, who is a senior data scientist at CloudTrucks. And we really wanted to discuss the supply chain crisis that everyone's been talking about and everyone has probably been impacted by. So, Sam, it's really nice to have you on the podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here. Appreciate you having me.
All right, so let's just jump right into it. You know, there's been a lot going on with the pandemic and the different effects that it's having, but specifically, everyone's kind of been focused on the supply chain crisis. So I think maybe what would be good is to chat a little bit about your background and then dive into kind of what you're seeing.
Okay. Yeah, great. So I'll start off. I used to be a finance professor, and I had to move back quickly to where my family lives, and professor jobs are hired semesters in advance. So I had the good fortune of being in Chattanooga, which has a lot of transportation companies. So I started working for a carrier, a large carrier, expedited carrier. I worked with a data platform company with their SaaS program that they had. I worked for another company who's building a platform to try and match carriers and shippers directly. And then I stumbled across the Series A announcement for CloudTrucks. And I was like, this is exactly the type of model business I was looking for. It has the alignment between the drivers, you do better, the drivers do better. And, they're the top employer in 29 states, so you can really move the needle. I love the model in general, the data availability. And, so I read that article, and I guarantee you less than 5 minutes, I'd already pulled up Tobenna on LinkedIn and pinged him and said, please let him reply to me. And we were talking shortly after. Then I got to meet the team and everything, and I'm very pleased. It's really it's very nice. So I guess that's my background pretty much. I guess I can comment and say that I got into data science. When I first started looking, the irony is I wasn't looking in transportation or data science. I was looking for finance. And I came across an article that said that the top job in the U.S. was data science. I didn't know what it was. And so I liked a lot of my research. So good fortune followed.
All right. Well, we're really glad that you saw that Series A announcement and that you reached out and now you've been on the team. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is like you just described, and you've had an extensive career as just working in the transportation sector and really going deep across different business models in the trucking industry. But before that, you were in the academic sector, and you were really focused on doing a lot of research, right? So I think this is the perfect combination for the conversation that we're having today. So can you chat a little bit about the current supply chain crisis and what's really going on?
Right. Yes. And I think it boils down to one thing, and there's a couple of factors that really affect that. But the main thing is the consumption of goods, the consumption of products that go on trucks. Typically, when there's a recession, you have a large reduction in services and goods that take place. But in this case, because of the pandemic, instead of us spending our money on vacations, eating out, concerts, etc., in general, a lot of leisure and hospitality type stuff, we instead sat home and purchased lots of items. Typically the economy is about 30% of goods and about 70% services. So it's a large shift that took place. And also a huge point is of the goods that consumers consume, about 11% of it's imported. So there's a large amount that actually has a shift that is taking place. If you do a straight line, if you look at the consumer expenditures, personal expenditures that have happened in 2019, and just draw a straight line, we've consumed since the pandemic about $4.4 trillion more in consumer goods. That's a lot of truckloads. And of course, a lot of that comes from overseas. So it's bundled everything up. Another issue that affects is that in typical recessions, there are jobs lost across both upper, middle, and lower income classes. In this case, the vast majority of them were in hospitality and leisure, which meant they were in the lower income levels. So compared to the normal job losses that you have, you really didn't have that great reduction in discretionary or disposable income. So the combination of disposable income that you had and the shift has caused essentially a huge glut in the consumption of goods. And I would have, honestly, I was wrong. Tobenna can cite this. We had conversations about this probably 6 months ago. And I would have expected the conversion from consumption of goods to services to have happened more rapidly, but we haven't seen that. Part of that, of course, has been by certain things that couldn't be foreseen, like the Delta variant or the additional round of stimulus, which I suppose I should have seen. But essentially just the consumption of goods and the supply chain as it is has done quite well, but of course it can't handle everything.
Yeah, so one of the things you mentioned there is very interesting to me. So $4.4 trillion is that in like additional spend, or is that like more than what was expected? Wow. Yeah. So I guess a couple of questions that I have there. The first is like, what is that in percentage? Do you have any idea like what the percentage increase in spend looks like?
So probably, let me see. So I think around in July, it was probably I'm going to say initial 10 or 15%. So I'm thinking it's around maybe about 10% more, depending on which month it is. I can say that the personal savings for that time period is probably about $5 trillion. And so it's not surprising we have 600,000 to 700,000 still above where we'd expect to be, because the personal savings rate before the recession, maybe January, was probably about 7.3%. Now it's, I think, around 9.4%, and it peaked in April at like around, I want to say 34%. So it's been quite a ride, but it's still at elevated levels. And until that shifting takes place. And I should note two things. Just because we spent the money doesn't mean it's actually made it through the transportation system. I still have friends that are waiting on couches, for example, or waiting on Pelotons. And I don't really have a good measure of how long that'll be stretched out as far as affecting shipping, but the money's already been spent. So presumably it's been accounted for in the economic model.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I mean, so I guess we'll come back to this at some point during the conversation, but it'll be interesting to see at what point that spend starts to slow down, because people have to run out of money at some point if they're buying a lot more stuff. So I assume that the expectation here is at some point we see not just spend going down, but maybe going below where expectations were previously.
Well, that's honestly what I expected, but I haven't seen that yet. Another important thing to note, too, is that the inventory to sales ratio for retail items, we're still way below that level as well. So even if our spending stops, there's presumption, the expectation they will rebuild those inventories. Maybe not to the full level, because if it's a new, more e-commerce model, there's not as much need to be on the shelves as opposed to at a distribution center, which is more efficient. But still, we're substantially below. So I'm not exactly sure when that's going to balance out, but it still gives additional time for the supply chain to still be stressed.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, so let's talk about the effect on the trucking industry specifically. What exactly are you seeing?
Okay, so I ran some numbers that I've wanted to run for a while today. As you know, we have some pricing models that are proprietary stuff, and one of the things that it does is it has some calculations about the deadhead that takes place, because deadhead's important because not only does it mean that a shipment will cost more money, but that extra time that truck is running doing the deadhead as opposed to running a load, it means that its capacity is less available. So effectively, additional deadhead takes trucks off the road, even if the trucks stay the same. And there was a large imbalance, of course, that took place. We had, a lot of manufacturing stop and then restart. We had, certain goods that, we of course, had to purchase, like toilet paper and et cetera, ramp up, and other items. So there's been a shift in the market networks and the imbalances that took place. So on our numbers from our models, deadhead is compared to the deadhead from, let's say, so after the large spike that took place in deadhead around the pandemic, from March 1st until, let's say, the end of August, deadhead's up about 20% still. So during that average time, an additional 20% extra deadhead. And I also know that Werner said in their call, I believe it was Werner, that said that if they could just spend less time at the docks, they could easily add 4 to 5% more capacity. So additional time of not just in transporting it, because it's a less efficient network through the shifts that are taking place. Also additional times at the, when you're bumping the docks means that it's taking a large amount of additional capacity off the road. So I guess I can add to, well, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'll add some more.
No, I was curious. So I understand how the increase in deadheads certainly takes more capacity off the roads, like you mentioned, and also increase in wait times at the docks. What's causing that increase in deadheads? And I guess the docks, we kind of know what's going on there, but what's causing the increase in deadheads?
Right. So a carrier, if everything was operating as normal, maybe a carrier they take some retail load to Columbus, Ohio for some, let's say they deliver paper towels and toilet paper or some item. And they expect to leave Columbus, Ohio with a particular load of some manufactured good. Well, when they get to Columbus, Ohio, it turns out, that load they were expecting to return on, that shop isn't open, or it could be COVID temporarily shut it down, or there's less demand for that product. So instead of having that route they set up in advance to build that efficient network, the hard work that carrier put in place to do that, life happens, and certain shutdowns and transitions and changing product mixes and et cetera cause that. I mean, I can also add too, I've heard this quote, I think Ken Adamo said this, that, it's not just that what's on the truck, as far as what's on the trucks, but if we buy something in the grocery store as opposed to eating at a restaurant, it takes up substantially more space. And the best example I've ever heard of was that one truckload of syrup from, let's say, Coca-Cola or Pepsi is equivalent to 10 truckloads of bottles and cans. So our place and where we consume the items also makes a big difference in taking that capacity off for the same amount of regular consumption that would take place, for the same amount of sodas I might drink, for example.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So you were talking about, okay, so there's the pandemic hit, some manufacturing stopped for some period of time. This led to an increase in deadheads. Capacity was taken off the roads. I assume this led to an increase in rates across the board in trucking.
Yeah, absolutely. If I want to point out one positive thing about the pandemic, I can say one positive thing about the pandemic that affected trucking is that at least initially in the first few months when we're all staying home, the actual transit rates, the speeds there to travel safely was actually high. But that's pretty much the only positive thing I can say about the pandemic. But at the same time, in addition, yes, all those things affected the capacity that's developed, but also the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse has been affected, and that's taken off about 100,000 drivers, and only 20% of those have actually returned or in the process of returning back to work as well. So we've also, in addition to having more requirements, we have less drivers available to do those requirements. And recently we have additional issues, which we can talk about.
That's fascinating. Okay, so you said there are 100,000 violations from drug and alcohol clearinghouses. So this is where drivers get tested, they fail their drug test or alcohol test for whatever reason. And typically, you would see some large percent of those drivers come back after some period of time. They go through whatever mandatory requirements that they're required to go through. But in this case, only 20% of those drivers came back.
Yes. Yeah, around that range, around 20%. I mean, there's just so much competition from, let's say that they'd like to drive, but, the e-commerce model also has shifted to have a lot more delivery drivers.
Right.
And if you look at the HOS hours for local haul compared to regional and long haul driving, you can see huge increases in the hours those drivers have taken place, which is not surprising given all the e-commerce additional orders that have taken place. So additional construction, we have a home shortage between 1.3 and 1.5 million home shortage. So construction is quite proliferant. And then warehousing jobs in general are in great need. So if you consider those, which I do, to be the most available substitutes for who might choose to be an over-the-road truck driver, Those mean they get home at night, and the wage increases that are taking place means they're extremely competitive. So
yeah, no, that's fascinating. Okay, so it sounds like there's kind of this. There are a number of different effects of the pandemic, right? So even when you're talking about these like delivery jobs, for example, one of the things you mentioned was increasing consumption, but part of the consumption increase was also people ordering food at home, which led to expansion of some of the food delivery companies. So what you're saying is those then became viable options for some of the people who might have been part of the 100,000 people, for example, who got these violations. And instead of going back to trucking, they decided to pick one of these other industries to go into. Let's talk about another effect that we've been seeing that I'm very curious about. So that's trailers, right? So you mentioned, again, like I keep bringing things back to some of the earlier points you make because everything is kind of tied together. You mentioned that manufacturing stopped for some period of time, right? And at the same time, we're seeing an increase in consumption. So this affected things across the board. One of the things that we're seeing is an increase in this trailer shortage. So can you describe what the trailer shortage is, why it's important, and what's really going on there?
Yeah, there's really a couple factors. I know one large carrier said that they used about 30% of their trailers just for storage. So it makes it less available to do drop and hook type operations. Another issue is that so many of the trailers, the pricing in the trailers, well, I should say the first thing is that they also have troubles getting employees to build the trailers. But then when we're building the trailers, aluminum's up huge, steel and other products are up huge. So if you look at like the trailer pricing index that posted on Fred, trailer pricing was pretty much flat through all 2019, part of 2020, and now it's up 25% in cost. So additionally, they're having trouble manufacturing, and of course, the raw materials and that manufacturing issue is driving up prices dramatically, in addition to the additional storage space they use because all the warehouses are used. So I guess one last comment on that. So drop and hook is a great way to get around all the dock door times and issues that you have. But if that capacity is tied up or not available to expand it as rapidly, then of course that's an additional issue.
Yeah, and just for anyone who's listening who doesn't understand, what exactly is drop and hook?
Oh, I apologize. So if lots of times what you have is you have a truck and a trailer that bump dock doors, and they'll live load and live unload, and that might take 2 hours, 2 hours and a half, something in that range. A drop and hook has the advantage that you pull up and you unhook the trailer that you have, and then you hook to a second one, and that transition may take 30, 45 minutes, and the truck doesn't have to wait there during the live load or live unload process that takes place. So that could add 2 hours of savings at one location. So it's a substantial savings. And I know, to give you how substantial, if everyone could do a drop and hook and every truck saved 2 hours, there was a study by David Carell in 2019. He's from MIT, that his estimates in 2019 is that if every driver just drove 12 more minutes, it would take away the driver shortage at that time. So if 12 minutes additional driving time in 2019 would take away the driver shortage, imagine if you had a significant number of drop and hook operations that could save, let's say, 2 hours at a time. It really would be quite meaningful as far as bringing that additional capacity on availability on the road.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so now there's less drop and hooks. A number of these trailers are being used for storage. Also, my understanding is that there is, due to the manufacturing being stopped earlier, and also due to the increase in consumption, there just aren't enough trailers out there. Like, we find it very hard to get new trailers, especially dry van, which moves most of the goods in the country. So, do you know what's going on with the trailer shortage? Like, I've seen things about chips, issues with chips. I don't know if that affects trailers or it doesn't affect trailers. Like, do you know why we haven't been able to get back to the manufacturing level on the trailer side that we need to, given all of the demand out there?
I think part of it is the initial furlough. They did not expect to see this demand. So it was initial furlough at the start of the pandemic. those employers that were building trailers now have other high-paying jobs, just like the tractor truck driver likely have. And then the additional costs make it, also more of an impediment to get those. The chips may affect the refrigeration unit for the reefer, the refrigerator trailers. The chips are certainly having a huge issue for the tractor trailers and making them available for use. Part of that, though, is also the chip shortage. Part of it is because a lot of the chip manufacturing, when we had that higher level of consumption of electronics, there was some shifting in what the chips were used for. Additional, I know in Malaysia and I think Japan, due to COVID, there were a lot of chip plant shutdowns that took place. So I would see the chip shutdown as larger as a factor affecting trucking as opposed tractors as opposed to affecting the trailers. And you can see that I think the average age, I think it was J.B. Hunt, their average age of a tractor went from 1.7 years to 1.9, which isn't that big of a shift. But if you consider that, the number of orders, well, let me backwards a little bit. Normally to replenish or replace the tractors, which typically have about an 8-year life, you need to order consensus estimates commonly around 25,000 a month. Aaron Terrazas at Convoy did an estimate where it was around 31,000 a month. So, and that's just to maintain the same level. Currently, while we did have some very large orders at the end of last year and early this year, currently last 6 months, we've only averaged a little less or right around 30,000 per ACT. So even if those got delivered on time, they still wouldn't fully encapsulate the replacement that we need. So, but a lot of the orders that are taking place, they will happen, but look for them maybe to come through, based on estimates I've read, mid-2022. So we have difficulty, as we said, getting the drivers to sit in the trucks, but we're also having difficulty getting the trucks and parts for those trucks as well. I know we've known some people that have had breakdowns that have taken, weeks, if not particularly longer, to actually get rebuilt. And yeah, it is true the used truck market has stepped in some, but those prices have gone up dramatically as well. So it's really a tough situation. But it will reverse. It will normalize. Just the question is when. And that's another part of this conversation. I'm happy to chat about
yeah.
this.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Let's before we go to talking about when things are going to normalize, I want to go back to the ports. So there was this really famous or really popular Twitter thread by Ryan Peterson. He runs, he's the CEO of Flexport, co-founder and CEO of Flexport. And he was just talking about what he found out about what's going on in the ports, how that's leading to delays. He had some suggestions. I was wondering if you've been able to read this thread and kind of what your thoughts are about the ports and then how this translates back into the trucking side as well.
Yeah, I find this very interesting. So I did read the thread. The first part, I believe he says something like the captain of the boat says normally it's for, at sea memorials, but this time it was to cruise around to watch the cranes and stuff, but which is kind of a memorial itself because, half of it's dead because everything is so full. So if you have no place to put the container that you take off a ship and you have no place to, shift things around, essentially it's all clogged up. And from a trucking perspective, I know that the LAX port, for example, just to let you know how clogged it up, LAX is if you're returning empty containers and it's on a first come, first served basis on the day. So let's say you get there at 11 o'clock and you have an empty container you want to drop off and you're there to pick up a loaded container. Well, if they've reached their limit for that day for empty containers and you arrive 1 minute after that, well, then you can't remove that empty container off the chassis, which means that you then can't pick up the full container. So, it gets fully clogged up. And there's not a lot of solutions outside of, some of the suggestions Ryan Peterson made as far as setting up a separate location, allow them to stack higher, or, simply other things to improve the process and the ability for them to operate. And even Biden pushing for 24/7 and Buttigieg pushing for 24/7 operations sounds great, but again, you need skilled operators on those cranes and other people to be able to do that. But that is the greatest bottleneck, so it deserves the greatest attention. But it's difficult. The only personal thing I've seen to help solve this is I had to drive down to Atlanta on Saturday, and on my way there and back, I saw something I might have seen once, but I saw it, I don't know, 5 or 6 times. I saw intermodals on step decks, on a flatbed, essentially as a compromise since they couldn't find a chassis. So that will help a little bit, but overall, that's just a very small fractional change in the big problem that exists.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And just like we've discussed so far, this then leads back into the trucking issues. For example, if you mentioned the driver going over there to drop off the MT, pick up the loaded container, if they can't do that, that's even more kind of supply that's not available, right? So it kind of worsens the problem even more. So like all of this supply chain stuff is tied together. Things have to go from the ports to the distribution center to final location, and if we have things being clogged up on one part of the system, then it affects everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and I don't know of a quick fix. I do think that if they get a fix in place, because with queuing theory, the way that cost increased exponentially, I do think that if they do find a solution, it can quickly, the amount of cost per the reduction in the queue that takes place can add some capacity pretty quickly if they can find a solution. And, some people say that Chinese New Year will be a solution because things will slow down. That may or may not be the case. They expected that last year, but there's really no slowdown. I don't, demand will come down eventually. I don't know when, but it's quite a bottleneck.
Yeah. So let's talk about things returning to normal. But I'm actually curious, first of all, what normal means, because it feels like things have shifted, right? So what's the new normal? What do you expect the new normal to be? And when do you expect things to start flowing much more efficiently again?
So that's tough. I do think there's a new normal. I think there might be a dip in e-commerce activity, but nothing towards the pre-pandemic levels. I do think the inventory to sales ratio will normalize, maybe not to the full level, but it'll get back to where it was. What will normal be? Normal will be things like, I know in the JB Hunt call, they said that they had a 6% volume reduction in intermodal and 9% in the transcontinental intermodal volume. I mean, normal means that those operations will go properly, as we mentioned also at the docks. Normal also mean that the network efficiencies that normally exist and reduce deadhead and less wait times will also come to normal. But all that again comes down to less consumption and, for speedy recovery at the port, some sort of solution that improves that situation. But I think normal best case, mid 2022. I still think, I don't think we'll see anything like 2019. I know there's a section on trucking rates where, the 2019 rates might have been for an 8-month average around, let's say, $1.85 a mile. Currently, we're about $1 above that. I don't expect to get back down to those levels, but I do think somewhere in between will happen. I guess part of it depends too on, how long the chip shortage takes place and when those trucking orders come through. I can say one positive sign I noticed is in JB Hunt, this surprised me, is that JB Hunt mentioned that they actually added seated trucks on both the dedicated and their truckload segment. To me, that was a surprise. I didn't think they'd be able to do that in those estimates. But at the same time, I know that PAM Transport said they only met 80% of their equipment goals. So I think that might be the more typical. But it is a positive sign, and there has been a large amount of rate increases or driver pay increases that, of course, affect the rates. But I think best case, mid 2022, and that's I know it's a guess, but that's my best guess currently.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it. So, as Sam predicted, mid 2022, we'll come back. We'll look at how things are going. I think
yeah.
I think if there's one good thing that's coming out of this, or at least what I hope to see in this new normal, it's that, like you mentioned, rates are higher today than they were previously. But the core part that I care about there is how much drivers are making per mile, and how much owner operators are able to take home per mile. And I do remember those like early 2019 when it was I was seeing some of those that were like $1.50 per mile, and that was really rough for the drivers who actually have to move those loads. So it'll be great to see that things have shifted due to increasing competition, more interest in what's going on in the freight space overall, which I think is also exciting, and hopefully that definitely continues. But Sam, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much. It's been nice spending time and learning more about what's going on.
It's been my pleasure. I appreciate having me. Thank you.